I still remember the day I found that sealed glass seed jar at the back of the walk-in cooler, the one my son-in-law had tossed aside like a piece of junk mail. Inside was the original partnership agreement that would later dismantle his $830,000 fraud and land him in a federal courtroom. Today, I own Seed of Deceit Gardens, and every Saturday you can find Kenneth here, bent over trays of heirloom tomato seedlings, wearing a bright orange vest that reads, "Planted Lies." Every packet we mail out prints the probate-fraud docket number as a reminder. In gardening and in life, you cannot escape what you sow. My name is Miriam Coulter. I am 56 years old, a widow, and for 30 years I ran a small organic farm with my husband Daniel on 12 acres of black Iowa soil. Daniel was the quiet architect of our safety nets, a man who triple-checked every contract and always kept a spare key hidden in a rusted coffee can in the barn, because he never trusted a single point of failure. When pancreatic cancer took him in the winter of 2020, I inherited a $115,000 life insurance payout, a paid-off farm, and a daughter named Chloe who had long since traded dirt under her nails for manicures in Chicago. Chloe married Kenneth Bellamy, a self-styled agribusiness consultant with an MBA and a smile that made you want to check your wallet. They were the golden couple, always posting on social media about farm-to-table living while Kenneth private-jetted to pitch meetings. But family is family. And when Kenneth approached me 6 months after the funeral with a slick proposal to turn Daniel's beloved heirloom vegetable collection into a subscription seed bank, I said yes. I poured every cent of that $115,000 into retrofitting the old cold storage, acquiring a laminar flow hood for tissue culture, a cryogenic Duor for seed banking, and legally establishing Heritage Roots Seed Partners, LLC, with Kenneth as the 50% co-owner and operating manager. He notarized everything in the presence of a county bank officer, even a side commitment for lifetime free organic seedlings for my community garden, and I believed I was securing Daniel's legacy. Then, 18 months later, on a Tuesday morning in early April, I walked into our climate-controlled seed vault to pull Amish paste tomato seeds for a school group and found the shelves bare. No vacuum-sealed Mylar bags, no labeled glass jars, no germination chambers with controlled LED arrays, just a single envelope taped to the humidity monitor containing a one-page notice of dissolution of partnership, bearing my forged signature, and a check for $4,500 with the memo line, "Compost buyout." I stared at that check, the ink still sharp, and I realized the entire genetic stock, 211 heritage varieties including Daniel's irreplaceable landrace corn and 6 generations of carefully selected Brandywine lines, had been sold. Within 24 hours, like buzzards circling a downed calf, Chloe and Kenneth arrived. They wore matching linen outfits and expressions of manufactured concern. Chloe hugged me, her perfume clashing with the smell of tractor grease, and said, "Mom, you've been under so much stress. Let Kenneth and me take care of everything, okay? We've drafted documents to transfer the farm into a family trust for your protection." Kenneth patted my shoulder, his laptop bag slung like a weapon. "Miriam, the dissolution was just good business. The offer from AgriSynth Genomics was too good to pass up. They're patenting a portfolio of drought-tolerant traits, and our vault was a gold mine. But you're still our beloved matriarch. We'll set you up in the guest house, manage the property, and you can finally rest." I nodded, my mind churning. They thought I was foggy and broken. I let them believe it. That night, after they'd retreated to the parlor to review legalities, and I could hear the low murmur of them strategizing over a bottle of my late husband's wine, I went back to the cold storage unit. The main vault was empty, a hollowed-out shell with racks still labeled in Daniel's handwriting. Cherokee Purple, 2018 lot, germ 97%. I had to brace myself against the stainless steel prep table to keep from sobbing, because every empty drawer felt like a second burial of his life's work. But the walk-in cooler had a cluttered corner where Kenneth had dumped broken seed-cleaning screens, old catalogs, and a stack of pH meter probes that had been recalled years ago. I remembered Daniel always stashing important papers in odd places, a habit born from surviving a tornado when he was 19. He'd said, "Tornado don't care what it flings, but a glass jar sealed tight will ride the wind and still be there when the dust settles." I shoved aside a stack of mildewed burlap sacks and found a heavy glass half-gallon jar with a rubber gasket and a rusty wire bale. It had been used for bulk seed storage, the kind you burp to release ethylene gas from saved pepper seeds, but now it contained a single rolled sheaf of paper. I unscrewed the lid, pulled out the papers, and unrolled them on a seed sorting table under the flickering fluorescent light. It was the original signed partnership agreement for Heritage Roots Seed Partners, dated 18 months earlier. Every page had our genuine signatures, notarized by the same bank officer, with the embossed seal still sharp enough to catch my fingernail. But stapled to the back, in Daniel's tiny block handwriting on a torn piece of grid paper, was a note I hadn't seen before. Miriam, if you're reading this, my worst expectations have come true. I added a clause to this document without your knowledge because I never trusted Kenneth's smile. Section 9. B. No dissolution, transfer, or sale of essential biological assets shall be valid without the in-person, notarized consent of both partners, witnessed by a designated county recorder's representative, and the original filed with the recorder's office. I lodged the master copy there. They can't touch the vault without you. Do not sign anything. Save the land. My hands shook. Daniel, even from the grave, had built a dead man's switch. I slid the jar into my apron along with the papers and went back inside, the glass cool against my hip and the words burning in my mind. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that the truest safeguards aren't the ones we see, but the ones quietly embedded by those who truly love us. Now, back to the night everything shifted. Over the next week, Chloe and Kenneth orchestrated a relentless campaign of care. They installed security cameras in the farmhouse, pointing at the kitchen, the hallways, my bedroom door, tiny black lenses that blinked red every time I moved. They changed the Wi-Fi password and told me it was for faster streaming, but I noticed my old laptop wouldn't connect to even check the weather. Every afternoon, Chloe would bring a stack of documents to the kitchen table, always with a cup of herbal tea that smelled of valerian, a herb I knew could make you drowsy. Kenneth called them consolidation agreements and estate transfer affidavits, each one designed to quietly strip me of every asset, from the water rights to the mineral tract, even the antique John Deere tractor Daniel had restored. The boilerplate was thick with terms like irrevocable trust conveyance and durable power of attorney coupled with an interest, and one clause tried to appoint Kenneth as my healthcare proxy, with full power to make medical decisions. I played along, clutching my chest occasionally, mentioning dizzy spells and blaming my hesitation on grief brain fog. Every time they put a paper in front of me, I'd fumble for my reading glasses, squint at the tiny type, and say I needed to sleep on it. Kenneth's jaw tightened until the muscle in his temple jumped. Chloe's eyes went flat and cold, like a pond in January. But I was a farmer, not a fool, and I'd navigated commodity panic markets, roving cattle buyers, and once a seed salesman who tried to pass off hybrid corn as open-pollinated by shaking the bag. I knew when I was being cornered. I refused to sign anything until I could think clearly, and they, not wanting to spook me into lawyering up, didn't push too hard at first. They shifted tactics. "We just want to take care of you, Mom," Chloe cooed. "You shouldn't be alone in this big old farmhouse. Why don't you move into our guest suite for a while? Just until you feel stronger." I saw the trap, but I also saw the chance to get closer to their operations, to hear the phone calls they thought I was too sedated to notice. So I agreed, and within 3 days they had moved me into a sterile guest suite above their detached garage. The room had a hospital-style bed, beige walls, and motion sensors on the door under the pretense of fall prevention. I knew those sensors pinged Kenneth's phone every time I left the room. They'd effectively confined me without a single visible lock. Living in their home was like being a stray cat in a laboratory. I had the run of the house only when they were out, and I watched. I watched Kenneth take calls in the laundry room, his voice a frantic whisper about structuring payments and liability shield foreign accounts, and the damn escrow contingency won't clear until the dissolution holds. I heard him say, "No, we can't touch the principal until the title is marketable." AgriSynth's compliance officer keeps asking for a clean chain of custody, and that old woman's name is still on the accessions log. I saw Chloe walk in on one of those calls, her face pinched, and heard her hiss. "You said the dissolution would hold, Kenneth. AgriSynth is getting impatient. That $830,000 is locked in escrow until they are sure the title is clean." Fix it. He'd snap back that he was working on the old lady, and she'd hiss, then work faster. I didn't marry a loser. The venom in her voice, directed at her own mother through the prism of greed, was a sound I will never forget. Their spending was a red flag parade. A new Mercedes SUV appeared in the driveway, a catered dinner party for agri-investors they'd never mentioned, and Kenneth bought a $10,000 espresso machine because, as he told Chloe, clients expect quality. Yet I overheard a call from a collection agency that Kenneth dodged by claiming he was out of the country, and another from a private lender demanding a balloon payment on a bridge loan he'd taken against the expected agri-synth proceeds. The dissonance between their ostentation and their actual liquidity told me everything. They were burning through credit, expecting the windfall to cover the holes, and they were running out of time. A week into my captivity, an opportunity arrived in the form of a burst pipe under the kitchen sink. The brass compression fitting had corroded, and water was spraying across the custom Italian tile, pooling around the baseboards. Kenneth was panicking, flapping his hands, because he'd never fixed a plumbing problem in his life, and he was afraid the water would damage his oak-paneled office on the other side of the wall. He was shouting at Chloe to call a plumber, but she was on hold with some service that had a 2-hour wait. I slipped on my old work boots, grabbed a pipe wrench and a bucket from Daniel's tool bench in the garage, and pushed past them. "Turn off the main valve, Kenneth," I said flatly. He just stared, so I walked to the basement, wrenched the gate valve closed, came back up, and had the compression fitting replaced in 15 minutes. My hands remembered the precise torque needed, a skill learned 30 years earlier helping Daniel winterize irrigation lines, sweating copper joints, and once repiping an entire greenhouse after a hail storm. While they stood there blinking, I said, "I'll just check the shut-off valves in the office, Kenneth. Don't want to repeat. Water can wick into the drywall and cause black mold." He was too distracted, mopping up with dish towels to stop me, and I walked straight into his home office for the first time. The office was a shrine to his ego, framed diplomas from a diploma mill, a photo of him shaking hands with a state senator, a desk with an oversized monitor, and a floor-to-ceiling safe with an electronic keypad. But the filing cabinet in the far corner was locked. I remembered Daniel's lesson. The small locks on office cabinets are purely cosmetic, cheap wafer cylinders you can defeat with a bobby pin. I still kept one in my hair, a habit from my 20s when I'd locked myself out of the farm truck more times than I could count, and within a minute I had the lock sprung with a tiny click. Inside, I found a hanging folder marked HRS Partners, dissolved. The folder was thick. I slipped it under my jacket, relocked the cabinet, and with the house still empty and the sound of a wet vacuum starting in the kitchen, I carried the folder to my guest suite and buried it under the mattress. Over the next 2 nights, while they slept and the motion sensors glowed green in the dark, I spread the documents on my bed and worked by the light of a small LED book lamp I'd smuggled in. Inside were copies of the forged dissolution agreement, my signature exquisitely replicated, probably by a digital pen plotter given the identical pressure points and ink density to the original agreement. I compared the forgery to the original under a jeweler's loop from my sewing kit. I'd learned the basics of document authentication during a farm subsidy dispute years ago, when a claims adjuster tried to deny our crop loss payment with a doctored yield map, and I still had the sharp eyes of a seed sorter who can spot a cracked testa at arm's length. The loop of my M in Miriam was off by a fraction of a millimeter. The crossbar of the T terminated with a blunt edge instead of my typical tapered flourish, and the terminal loop was a perfect vector match to a scanned copy of my signature from a county form, meaning it had been digitally lifted and pasted, not free-handed. That was evidence of deliberate forgery using a computer, not just a mistaken signature. There was also a proposed asset sale agreement to Agri-Synth Genomics, listing the entire genetic catalog, propagation protocols, germination testing data, and even Daniel's handwritten breeding notes on corn population genetics as transferred intellectual property. The purchase price was $830,000, with a contingency clause that all partnership claims be legally extinguished, and the seller warranting they had full authority to convey title. The document showed that Kenneth had testified to Agri-Synth in a signed affidavit that I was mentally incompetent, and that he held full power of attorney as managing partner, which was a lie because I'd never signed any power of attorney. Worse, I found a draft of a durable power of attorney for property naming Kenneth as my agent, with a blank signature line and a notary block that was partially filled out with the same notary stamp number from our original partnership. It was clear they planned to backdate this document and spring it later, once I was too browbeaten or medicated to object. Tucked behind that was a promissory note from Kenneth to a hard money lender, secured against my farm's title, dated 3 weeks before the dissolution, indicating he'd already been borrowing against the expected proceeds and exposing the farm to foreclosure if the agri-synth deal fell through. My stomach turned cold. They weren't just stealing my business and Daniel's legacy. They were setting me up as the scapegoat for their debts, while my signature sat on a fraudulent instrument that could leave me penniless and homeless. I realized I needed more than just defensive stalling. I needed an ally on the outside, someone with authority who could verify Daniel's dead man's switch and build a criminal case. The next time Kenneth and Chloe went to a so-called networking dinner at an upscale steakhouse, I used my old burner phone, a cheap flip model I'd kept hidden in a sealed bag of potting soil in the garage. I called the county recorder's office from the phone, my voice low. I reached a woman named Patricia, the chief deputy recorder, who sounded like she'd seen every scam in the county and was old enough to remember when deeds were written in cursive. I explained my name and the partnership and asked if a master copy of the original agreement was on file. She paused, and I heard the click of a keyboard. Then she said, "Yes, ma'am, we have a notarized, witnessed original copy of Heritage Root Seed Partners LLC operating agreement, filed under document number 2021-4732. And I'll tell you, there's a red flag on your file. Someone tried to file a dissolution 2 weeks ago, but our system flagged it because Section 9(b) requires your in-person verification. I personally rejected it, and I called the phone number on the dissolution filing, some man named Kenneth Bellamy, but he never returned my call. I was about to send a certified letter to the address on file. My heart lifted. Daniel's dead man's switch was fully operational, and Patricia had been the human gatekeeper who enforced it. Then she said, "This might interest you. We've been seeing a rash of agricultural intellectual property fraud in the region, and my office has a cooperative memorandum with the USDA's Office of Inspector General. If you suspect forgery and attempted grand theft, I can put you in touch with an investigator. I've already made notes in the file, so it's flagged for them automatically." Within 2 days, a soft-spoken federal investigator named Agent Rebecca Thorne met me at a public library 15 miles away. I told Kenneth I was going to a grief support group, and he was too focused on a frantic call with his loan officer to protest. I took back roads, doubling back once to ensure I wasn't followed, and parked behind the library's loading dock. Agent Thorne was already there, a woman in her 40s with a calm, methodical manner, and a notebook filled with precise questions. I gave her copies of the forged documents, the original partnership agreement, and Daniel's note. She was thorough, asking not just about the signatures, but about the seed bank's entire operational protocol, because she wanted to establish my intimate familiarity with the business as proof of genuine ownership. I explained everything in forensic detail. The vault's temperature and humidity locked at 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 25% relative humidity for optimal longevity of orthodox seeds, the 2-stage cooling system with a backup glycol chiller, the cryopreservation backup we'd implemented for our rarest varieties, using a controlled rate freezer that dropped 1 degree Celsius per minute down to -40, before plunging into liquid nitrogen, and the vitrification solutions we'd formulated using plant tissue culture protocols from a Colorado university. I described the accession logs that tracked each seed lot's germination rate, genetic drift, and isolation distances, records that only someone who'd spent years hand-pollinating squash and roguing off-type corn could produce. That level of granularity proved my ownership as much as any signature. Agent Thorne nodded and said, "Agri-Synth is a legitimate but ethically gray biotech firm hunting for heritage traits to patent, particularly drought-tolerance genes in landraces. They'll pay top dollar for clean title." Kenneth misrepresented ownership in a signed affidavit to them, which crosses into wire fraud because the offer and acceptance traveled interstate. We need hard evidence of his intent to defraud you personally, ideally a recording of him pressuring you to sign, acknowledging the forgery, or admitting the scheme. She gave me a key fob audio recorder disguised as a car alarm remote, with a range of 30 feet and a 30-hour battery, and walked me through the one-party consent laws in our state, which made my own recording legal. She said, "If you can get him to say something incriminating in front of you, we'll have him." A medical scare seemed the perfect test. I needed to know the depth of their depravity and also generate a recorded moment that would bury them. I waited until a Saturday morning, a time I knew Kenneth had a scheduled call with AgriSynth's compliance attorneys about the escrow deadline, which was 3 business days away. Around 10 a.m., I shuffled into the kitchen, clutching my left arm, and gasped, "Kenneth, something's wrong, my chest, I can't breathe right." I let myself crumple onto the tile floor, careful to land on my side and not hit my head hard. I lay there, eyes closed, breathing shallowly, and I could feel the vibration of Kenneth's footsteps as he approached my head. For a full 30 seconds, there was absolute silence, the kind of silence that isn't concern but calculation. Then I heard Chloe's voice from the hallway. "Is she faking again? She pulled a dizzy spell last Tuesday when you asked about the mineral rights." Kenneth's voice was flat. "Probably, but this could be useful. If she's incapacitated, we can get a court-appointed guardian by end of day. Call an ambulance, but first, where's the trust transfer document? Get it from my bag. If we can get a thumbprint on it before the paramedics arrive, we're golden." I felt a weight shift near my hand, not a check of my pulse, not a hand on my forehead, but Kenneth's fingers groping past my arm to snatch a leather bag from the counter behind me. He literally stepped over my body to grab the papers, and I heard the door to the office slam. Chloe called 911, but I heard her ask the operator in a cold, clinical tone, "How long does it take to get a medical power of attorney activated in this state? We need to get ahead of this. My mother has severe confusion, and we've been trying to do it the right way, but she's so combative." No concern, no warmth, just mechanics. Any residue of maternal love or family obligation dissolved right there on that cold floor. When the paramedics arrived, I let them check my blood pressure and pulse, admitted it might have been a panic attack, and insisted I didn't need to go to the hospital. I went back to my room a transformed woman, the key fob recorder still running in my pocket, having captured every syllable. The next 3 days were a masterclass in suppressed rage. Kenneth was jittery, constantly checking his phone, whispering with Chloe in the kitchen. I acted more compliant than ever, nodding at everything, even asking if I could help in some small way. On the 3rd day, he burst into my room with a bottle of champagne and a forced grin so wide it looked painful. "Miriam, wonderful news. AgriSynth has agreed to release the funds early as a goodwill gesture, but we need one final signature at the bank to certify the dissolution and the asset transfer. A quick trip to First Midwest, a notary, and it's over. You'll finally have peace, and I'll take care of everything." He practically vibrated with impatience, the champagne bottle sweating in his hand. I nodded slowly, my face carefully blank. "All right, Kenneth, let's get this settled." I put on my good wool coat, the one with deep pockets that Daniel had bought me at a farm auction 20 years ago, and I slipped the key fob recorder into one pocket, the original glass seed jar with the agreement into an oversized handbag, and a small digital voice recorder as a backup into my boot. Chloe drove us, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, her knuckles white on the steering wheel of the Mercedes. Kenneth kept sneaking glances at his phone, texting furiously, his leg bouncing. At the bank, we were ushered into a private conference room with a mahogany table, a notary, and 2 bank officers in dark suits. Kenneth had laid the ground, and they had a stack of documents already arranged. He slid a single sheet toward me with a gold pen. It was a final release and indemnification that essentially waived all my rights, acknowledged the dissolution as valid, and indemnified Kenneth against any future claim. He said, "Just sign right there, Miriam, and it's all done." Chloe leaned in, her voice syrupy. "Just sign, Mom. Then we can all go home and have a nice lunch." I looked at the paper, then at them, then at the bankers whose faces were professionally neutral but whose eyes showed the faint discomfort of people trapped in a family drama. I set the gold pen down with a small click that echoed. "Before I sign anything, I have a question." Kenneth's temple pulsed visibly. "Miriam, we've been through this. Don't delay. The notary has a schedule." I said, "I'm just curious, Kenneth. Does Section 9B of our original partnership agreement ring a bell? The one that says no dissolution is valid without my in-person, notarized consent witnessed by a county recorder's representative. Because that's the agreement you notarized yourself 18 months ago right here in this bank. And the master copy is filed with the county recorder under document number 2021-4732. The dissolution you tried to file was rejected because you didn't have my verification. So who, exactly, are you trying to fool with this piece of paper? The color drained from Kenneth's face, a rapid shift from tanned confidence to gray panic. Chloe grabbed his arm, her French manicured nails digging in. "What is she talking about?" she hissed. Kenneth started stammering. "This is a legal technicality, a simple oversight. We can refile with a retroactive consent. Just sign and we'll fix it later." I cut him off, my voice steady. "You forged my signature, Kenneth. You sold 211 heirloom varieties, including Daniel's secret corn breeding lines, developed over 3 decades of mass selection, and 6 generations of his own Brandywine selections that exist nowhere else on this planet, for $830,000. You left me a compost voucher for $4,500, and you lied to Agri-Synth that I was mentally incompetent. That's not just fraud. That's probate fraud, grand theft of agricultural intellectual property, and wire fraud across state lines, all felonies." I reached into my bag, pulled out the heavy glass seed jar, and placed it on the mahogany table with a resonant thunk that made the water glasses tremble. "This jar holds the original partnership agreement, with a note from my dead husband warning me not to trust you. I've already shared it with the USDA Office of Inspector General. They have copies of your forged documents, your fraudulent affidavit, and a recording of you stepping over my body to grab papers while you discussed getting a court-appointed guardian." At that moment, the conference room door opened with a soft pneumatic sigh, and Agent Thorne walked in with 2 uniformed officers from the county sheriff's department. She nodded at me, her expression calm and professional. Kenneth lunged for the jar, his hand outstretched, but one of the officers intercepted him with a practiced arm bar while Kenneth shrieked. "This is a setup. She's senile. She doesn't know what she's saying. She gave me power of attorney." Agent Thorne placed a digital recorder on the table and pressed play. Kenneth's own voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "If she's incapacitated, we can get a court-appointed guardian by end of day. Call an ambulance, but first, where's the trust transfer document?" Followed by Chloe's voice asking about medical power of attorney activation. The bankers recoiled as if the table had caught fire. The notary half rose from her chair, her face white, and said, "I'm not notarizing anything. This is coercion." Kenneth was handcuffed, screaming about his rights, while Chloe stood frozen, her mouth open, before an officer gently took her arm and read her rights as well. Agent Thorne looked at me and said, "You did exactly what Daniel hoped you would, Miriam. He built the fence and you held the gate." The legal aftermath was swift, thorough, and deeply satisfying. Forensic auditors, working with the USDA and the FBI's white-collar crime unit, uncovered that Kenneth and Chloe had not only attempted the seed vault sale, but had drained joint accounts, falsified loan documents, and had a fully prepared durable power of attorney backdated to before the dissolution to cover their tracks. Agent Thorne built an airtight case. Kenneth was convicted on 4 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of conspiracy, and 1 count of aggravated identity theft for the forged signatures. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release for the first 3, and ordered to pay full restitution of $830,000, which, thanks to a court-ordered asset freeze and seizure, came out of the Agri-Synth escrow account, plus the sale of his luxury vehicles and other assets. Chloe, who had been less hands-on but fully complicit in the conspiracy, accepted a plea deal for 3 years in federal prison, with her sentence reduced slightly because she testified about Kenneth's methods. But their marriage dissolved faster than a desiccated seed dropped in water once the handcuffs went on. The house, the espresso machine, the Mercedes, and every piece of their ostentatious lifestyle were seized and auctioned by the U.S. Marshals Service to satisfy the restitution order. The genetic stock, which Agri-Synth had not yet plated or sequenced because they were waiting for the title to clear, was returned to me intact under a court-sanctioned custodial order, the cryogenic duor still sealed, and the Mylar bags still labeled in my own handwriting. I used the restitution money to rebuild the seed bank, but I restructured it entirely. I placed the farm into a non-profit community land trust that protected the 12 acres in perpetuity from any future sale or lien. And I formed a new entity, a benefit corporation, that gave the county agricultural extension and a consortium of small farmers shared governance. I renamed it Seed of Deceit Gardens, and the logo is a cracked seed pod with a bright green sprout emerging from a broken padlock. Every seed packet we sell includes the original probate-fraud docket number, printed right below the planting instructions, as a permanent public record and a reminder that integrity cannot be dissolved by a forged signature. As for Kenneth, after serving 4 years of his sentence, he was released on parole with strict community service requirements. He had no other marketable skills besides talking, and his MBA was essentially worthless with a federal fraud conviction. I petitioned the court to assign his community service hours to Seed of Deceit Gardens, and the judge, who had read the full case file, approved it with a note that called it a fitting form of restorative justice. Every Saturday, rain or shine, Kenneth arrives at 7 a.m. sharp, signs the community service log, and dons the required bright orange safety vest with planted lies screen-printed across the back. He spends 8 hours transplanting seedlings, mixing sterile potting media from measured ratios of coir, perlite, and vermiculite, and labeling packets under the supervision of my greenhouse manager, a no-nonsense woman named Martha who once ran a commercial herb operation and who treats him with the same brisk efficiency she uses on stubborn tomato suckers. He has learned more about soil biology and honest labor in those weekends than his MBA ever taught him. I sometimes watch him from the office window, hunched over a tray of Cherokee purple seedlings, his hands now calloused and his back sore, and I remember Daniel's grid paper note. The quiet architect had planted a seed of justice long before the fraud ever sprouted. That seed still bears fruit, and my garden thrives. So, have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Write your story in the comments. And if you believe that the best revenge isn't anger but planting something so deeply truthful that no amount of forgery can uproot it, then hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of ordinary people who turned betrayal into a masterclass in accountability. Until next time, keep your soil honest and your seeds true. Goodbye.